Ignition liftoff. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff.
When I think of The Ordinary, I think of minimal yet high-performing products, which is true to the story behind the brand. Nicola Kilner shares with us the real highs and the lowest of lows of what it's taken to co-found a $3.6 billion company. So let's find out why she's a lady who launched. Right, before we get into it, if you like this episode, which I know you're going to, please don't forget to like and subscribe and to share it to your group chat. Welcome to Ladies Who Launch.
Thanks, Rochelle.
Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to sit down and talk to you. I've got so much to ask you. But I always like to start with early life because I think it's so important and I think it really plays such a big part in shaping us, who we are, how we handle situations later down the line. So tell us a little bit about how that looked to you. Where did you grow up? Yeah. Who was about?
So I was born in Sheffield, so a good northern upbringing. Grew up with my mum, dad. I've got an older sister. She's 3 years older than me. And actually just had a very happy, peaceful kind of childhood. My mum was a stay-at-home mum, so I feel like she was always around and, at every school trip, every pickup, mum was always there, which I just loved. And my dad was a radio DJ. It's always quite a fun job. And yeah, so life was all kind of pretty happy. As I got to my late teens, my dad was always a drinker, but never to a problem. But obviously as we got older, that became an issue and he ended up passing away from that. But I think in the years building up to that, he lost his job, which is kind of related to obviously his health and what was happening. But I think seeing how, I don't know, when you see someone lose their job and I'm like, wow, someone's purpose was taken away from them without them in control. Yeah. And I think that really instilled in me wanting to be in control of my life. And I think that's something that really I'm a control freak. I like to be in control of all aspects.
I recognise that. Real recognises real. I say I know it, and it's a hard thing, isn't it? Because you don't. Being a control freak is a wonderful thing in some ways, but also the thing that you kind of want to let a little bit of that go.
It's hard. My husband all the time, he's like, just let me do something. And I'm like, no, I just want to do it all.
You're a hard person to surprise.
Yeah. He's like, I'll plan the next holiday. And I'm like, no.
You can't.
I'll do it. But, probably what led to part of that, I think, was just seeing someone else maybe not having the control.
Right.
And I feel as well, I grew up where I feel with my dad's job, there was lots of exciting, it's glamorous, there's lots of exciting things, but we also didn't always have surplus money, and that was partly, because mum was a stay-at-home mum and just the other sacrifices you make. So again, I think I was also financially motivated in terms of I want freedom in life. I never want to rely on a man or even a job. I don't want to rely on anyone. I just want to be self-sufficient and again, it comes down to the control of if I want to buy a new dress, a new top, I want to go on holiday, I always want the ability to do what I want to do.
Yes.
I think the number one goal in life for me was always freedom, freedom of choice. And I think a lot of that comes from financial freedom and actually just the power of when you wake up in the morning, are you the one deciding what you can do? We were just talking about schools before this and I find that hard. I'm like, the school's in charge of my children.
Yeah, and I actually can't control that, but I am in control, for want of a better phrase, of my children because they're my responsibility, but that's also something that I can't control.
When you want to just go away and then I'm like, oh, they're at school Monday to Friday.
Yes.
So I think kind of always just been driven by really wanting freedom. But I feel, growing up just with a very loving family and, growing up in the north, lots of fresh air, countryside, kind people. So it was a happy time.
And how did the kind of knowing that you wanted freedom and seeing that around you and knowing that how important financial freedom was to you, how did that manifest itself in where you were choosing to go? How did you have was you aware of the path you wanted to make?
Yeah, well, I guess you realise young that when you don't have a talent in terms of singing or sports or any of those other paths, and I was actually, business is probably the best avenue. And even from an early age, I used to love watching Dragon's Den. I used to love like asking for like autobiographies on different kind of business people, because I think, again, to me, business was all about control in terms of you can make decisions, you can kind of own it, you can kind of be in charge.
Step into your power.
Yeah, so I always knew that was kind of the avenue, but I never knew, was it skincare, was it beauty? I never kind of knew which field it would be in. And I also never knew when it would happen. And I kind of was... So when I did my A-levels, and then obviously kind of figuring out what to do next, and obviously all my friends were going to uni, and I was like, I want to go to uni. I want to like move cities, go party, kind of like do that stuff. So I went to Nottingham, Trent, and I studied business management. But it was an amazing course I found. So it was business management in companies. So the first year was a normal year at uni, which was great because everyone's just having fun. All you have to do is pass. And then when it got to year 2 and year 3, we were sponsored by blue chip companies. So there was only 40 of us on the course. So then you would either go to, Boots, Rolls-Royce, Tesco's, Barclays, HSBC, one of these types of companies. And then they would sponsor you for the next 2 years. So you would effectively do a 5-month placement, and then you would go to university for a month. But they would, whereas normally at university you're doing like 10 hours of lectures a week. You would do intense lectures. You'd be there like 9 till 6 every day. You would do your exam, and then you would go back to a new role within the company.
That's like the dream.
Yeah, so
course.
within 2 years at Boots, so like when I graduated after my 3 years, I'd done 4 different roles at Boots. And, one of those includes managing a store, which, when you're 19 and you're put into manage a store where there's people double your age who have been there for like 20 years, and they do not want the graduate who's just come in to try and manage them and tell them what to do. Like, you really learn a lot about kind of leadership, resilience.
Because it's almost that's quite a unique course, because it's almost giving you experience at the same time as having a qualification, which is kind of is a little bit chicken and egg, isn't it? Someone can have all the qualifications in the world, but the experience of actually sitting in that role is sometimes what sways who gets that employment,
Yeah, without a doubt. And it was good. I mean, we got a salary, they paid our tuition fees. Like, I felt like I lucked out in just getting the best course. And then each time we studied a different module. So when we would study, the international business, we would get transfer work into the international department at Boots. So you'd actually have this real case study to kind of apply to everything you were learning. And again, I think I always kind of felt like actually, before starting anything, you have to learn and you have to kind of know some stuff. And actually going to a corporate is a really good way to do that, because you do learn a lot. You learn many good things. You also learn their challenges, like what makes them slow, kind of where they struggle. And so then when I graduated, I stayed on at Boots. And then I, again, did a role where I was assistant buyer on their beauty area, where they were just taking out Ruby and Millie. They were bringing in lots of new brands. And I think my style is, like, I like to think, and many people are, but like, I'm very kind, collaborative. I just like making things work. And I think at that time, going back, this is obviously 15 years ago, buying was much more tougher, where I think for a long time buying had been around, it's all about cost price negotiation. It's all about kind of who can win the most. I remember going on a negotiation course, and one of the things they told us was, if the supplier was overweight, find a meeting room far away, walk them up the stairs, get them really out of breath, sit them down, and like go in with your cost price.
Stop!
How crazy is that?
What?
So so I was listening to these things like, that's not human.
It's just not ethical.
And again, like, I think I'd also seen, part of, if you treat new brands, it's difficult, like, I think when you're a buyer, because new brands are obviously so keen to get into a retailer. It's all you need. And from that sense, they'll often say yes to all of the retailer's demands, like the retailer's the one with all the power. But if you put a brand in on terrible terms, they're going to be out 6 months later, because they don't have any money left to actually invest in promoting and PR. And
there goes their cash flow, there goes everything that's going to make those opportunities come to light.
So I think I'd kind of had this, let's just try and work with brands and actually collaborate. And I remember at the time a really nice, like, the head of trading for the department, he was like, I see, because I was like, I don't think buying's for me. Like, I think I'd rather go work in a brand team than kind of be in these types of conditions. And he was like, I think there's a future for like brand relationships where you're a buyer, but actually you are almost on their side and you're trying to make them. That's how we're going to get new brands in and really work. And so now I was really fortunate that because I'd kind of already showed my passion for these skills, that they actually then created a new role for me, which was to be their buyer for innovation, which was all around just finding new brands around the world and really hand-holding them into booths and making sure that actually I felt like I worked just as much for the brand as I did for Boots, because, I would make sure, obviously, Boots had the deal, but I would be working with them on their PR agencies, like how to make the plan, how to actually make the product sell at Boots, because I wanted them to be a success.
And make the most of the opportunity that they've been given.
And so we did a program called Latest Finds, where the brands would come in and they'd only have 12 weeks to prove their success.
Ooh.
So they'd have 12 weeks to get the sales, and then if the sales worked, they would then get a permanent listing. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I feel like I met so many incredible entrepreneurs in that time. And one of them was Brandon. Mm-hmm. So Brandon was with his previous beauty company called Indeed Labs. And I remember, from the second I met him, like his energy was just off the charts. When like you see, you look at your inbox and there's like always an email like you open first. Like as soon as I saw his name, I'd be like, open. Like his energy, his passion, and again, like his passion for science. So like I knew like any product, whatever he came up with, I would launch, because like I just knew there was so much going into it and behind it. So we did a couple of launches for Indeed. So we launched Nanoblur and we launched Snoxin, and they were just incredibly successful. And then overnight he suddenly just left Indeed. And I was, you feel heartbroken.
Yeah.
You're my
And you've built that relationship, and at that time, that's what's really sort of making work fun.
Yeah. I'm like, and also even just the numbers, like anything Brandon launched, like was successful. Like it got the listing because it was so good. But anyway, around this time, I was in my early 20s and I was thinking, I feel like I've learned a lot now, but maybe it's the time where I would actually like to start my own thing. So
Which is we should like talk about this, because at this time you're like what, 23?
Yeah.
Like you're so kind of, you've entered this world, but you're still really in your infancy, right? Of building those relationships. And I love this about you, because it's such a, for want of a better phrase, like a ballsy move to say, I'm in my early 20s, but I feel like I've learned enough here to sort of take this and find my own way.
Yeah.
It's impressive. I'm sure there were people around you that were sort of feeling, you've got this, you've qualified, you've got this amazing job, you've hit the ground running. Was there pushback from anyone around you at that time?
Probably only my mum, who was more just nervous around, like, are you sure you want to give up your job? Like, you've got a good chance here. But I'm a very much like the glass is half full, like, so it never felt scary, or, back then I was still living at home. It was just me, and like, it didn't feel like I had anything to risk. And again, everything's good in hindsight, but like one thing that I am actually so grateful for is that in my 20s, I really did take the risk and, worked all the hours.
Yeah.
Because now I'm in my 30s and I have my children and I have my family, and I feel like I, every day, like out of the 10 drop-off and pickups a week, like I'm at 9 of them, like, and I get to now have all of that freedom of time. Because I did do it in my 20s.
Because you took all those risks? Of course.
And, I talk to people now, and, it's so much older to take a risk. Like, if you have a mortgage, you have family, you have kids, like, you have to make different decisions. But if you are in your early 20s and you do have this feeling of, like, wanting to be an entrepreneur or just take a risk, again, depending on your circumstances, but, if you have got family or someone you could go and live with and have less risks, like, do it. Like, now's your time. And if it doesn't work out, like, you can go back to the corporate world. Like, it will always be there to kind of go and find. So I sent an email to Brandon to say, like, next time, because he lived in Toronto, so I was like, next time you're in London, like, I'd really like to meet you. I have an idea, like, I want to kind of talk to you about it. So then he was next over, within a couple of weeks. And so I told him my idea, which was almost like a TripAdvisor for beauty.
Okay.
Because I worked in beauty, and I felt like everyone was like, well, what's the best mascara? What's the best, foundation?
So you'd become sort of that trusted voice.
Yeah, and I thought there's actually nothing really out there. If you book you go on TripAdvisor.
Yeah.
Like in other fields, like there's a really good ranking and review system, but it doesn't really exist so much in beauty.
So you were sort of thinking of bringing your skills to beauty, but into the tech space almost.
Yeah. But effectively just get like a community of like reviews, ratings and stuff so you could see that. So I told him my idea and he was like, I love it. Like, can I do it with you? And then do you want to do DECIEM with me? Like, I'm going to start DECIEM. So I was like, perfect. And so that's how it all started. But effectively, as we did both and we, Beauty-wise, which was the beauty review website, we got the technology built for the website, but it got quite complex because unlike TripAdvisor, where every restaurant and hotel only has one name, actually in the world of beauty, the same product can have a different name in a different market.
Yeah.
There's different versions all the time, so it just got more complex. But at the same time as doing DECIEM, we actually had quite a lot of early success with some of the first brands. So DECIEM's from the Latin word for the number 10, and it was all about building 10 brands at once.
So this was the original vision. So
DECIEM's the parent company that still exists today that creates many brands, including The Ordinary. And I think because Brendan had actually had 2 beauty businesses before DECIEM, and I think, a lot of the learnings he'd had was actually this passion to really bring everything in-house. And I'd obviously also seen this other side of what he was saying from a lot of the companies I worked with where, a lot of beauty brands, and it's not to say this is wrong, this was just our different approach, but, a lot of beauty entrepreneurs, like everything's just outsourced. They get the PR agency, they get the third-party manufacturer, they get the formulator from the lab, and they get the design agency. And, when you're outsourcing everything, you kind of miss that kind of special thing of actually just a team
having everybody under one roof.
So
which I suppose a lot of people do that up front because it's cost effective, right? If you can sort of have somebody on a retainer for a little bit, or you could, that setup would help those small businesses up front.
Exactly. It's not cheap to kind of create those things, hire all of those people. But Brandon was really like, let's create the ecosystem, let's bring everything in-house, and let's build 10 brands at once. Because actually, if we're flying to Australia to meet a buyer, let's meet 10 buyers and actually do 10 different categories, and let's get kind of efficiencies that way. So that was
this must have been such an exciting time, like given your experience, like what you've learned, what what your passions are. You've met the guy that you love working with. You're gutted when he leaves and, you kind of don't have that dynamic anymore. At this time, like, how are you feeling in this moment? Are you just like, wow, the world is our oyster here?
Yeah, like, I've always felt very just lucky in life that... And, and I know, like, you kind of create your own opportunities, but I also just feel like I looked out that everything aligned and kind of I met the right people and the right things happened at the right time and those kind of opportunities arose. So we started DECIEM in 2013. And obviously the first couple of launches we launched at Boots. And again, so what would normally be a challenge for new brands, I had all the relationships. And again, because I always think of myself like I was so on both sides of like, okay, this has to work and be a win for Boots, but this has to work and be a win for us.
And that's kind of been your USP from the start, hasn't it, really? That even when you're at Boots, you were still on the side of the brand at the same time.
And I mean, the only way to create sustainable success is for it to be winning for both sides. Like if one side's hurting too much, it's never going to be a sustainable business relationship. And so we did our first few launches, and so it's interesting. So most of the brands that we started with don't really exist anymore today.
Right.
So we had Fountain, which was a liquid supplement brand, which I think was an incredible brand. And I actually think if we launched it today, I think it'd be really successful.
Oh, wouldn't it?
But I think it was kind of a bit ahead of its time. We had the Chemistry brand, which had like in the most incredible like hand creams, body care. We had a brand called Grow Gorgeous, which we actually sold to the Hut Group. So that brand was around 18 months old, and we sold it to the Hut Group for £9 million, and that actually really helped fund the business to kind of grow, which again is difficult when you have suddenly, we had a hair growth serum that really was selling so well. And it's difficult when you're like, then get approached around selling it, but you're like, okay, this actually is the brand that's really working.
Yes.
If we sell it, we could get money and then, hopefully create more brands. And
it's helping hold everything else up.
Exactly, further. So we had lots of different brands, but I think what made DECIEM so special were the people and the team. And like I look back and again, like feels like we lucked out, like we won the lottery. And you know, one thing I think with any startups, like you go through people because you have to find the right people to fit. And I think one of the things we learned early on, which also was partly because we didn't have that much money, but we couldn't really hire experience. And the odd time that we did really pay for someone experienced, it never actually worked. So we found that actually in the startup days, just getting people like straight out of school, straight out of university, one, because it's, you know, people start on lower salaries.
Yeah.
But actually, everyone was so open-minded because no one had preconceived ideas about the way things should be.
Yeah.
Because the experience is interesting. You know, DECIEM is now 1,500 people, and we couldn't have scaled it without bringing in experience. But it has to come at the right point of business, because in the early days, you know, you just need the people who will wear 10 different hats. You know, we'd be meeting retailers in the day, then we'd be in the factory making the products at night, helping them like make the order. And so you need the people who just can adjust. Like, your agility is everything in those early days.
And I suppose understanding that vision, like you say, if people have been in a certain role for years, and it's like sort of learnt behaviour, if you're setting up this whole ecosystem and you know how you want this to work, it's that agility and people really adapting to the way you're doing this.
Yeah, and I say this to the team, it's the naivety too. Because now sometimes, like, you know, we'll come up with an idea and someone will say, oh, well, we can't do this because of this. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. But back then you don't know the things that you're going to be stopped for. You're just like, great idea, let's do it, and like we'll just find a way. So actually that naivety is actually like a real big advantage, I think,
sweet
of being a
spot.
startup.
I think of running and working on one brand, and the thought of 9 more alongside it is a really overwhelming idea. So how is it hard to kind of give everything equal focus? Because I think, you know, on a small scale, I have one brand, I suppose, different businesses and different parts and avenues in what I do. But in doing so, I know that it's really hard for everything to shine at once, and something will always pull focus. Was that quite a hard thing to get right in that kind of ecosystem and that structure of everything having everyone's attention?
So before The Ordinary, it felt easy enough because actually all the brands were on a similar scale.
Right.
And actually it was just everyone, like the energy was unreal. Like everyone was just so hyper engaged, and like, you know, you'd have a design meeting and I think what was great about having so many different brands was like there was always a place for every idea.
Right.
Like someone would come up with an idea and you're like, okay, that fits that brand,
Yes.
that fits that brand, that fits that brand. And again, then like consumers also started to like link the brand. So the people who love DECIEM then would like love the other brand, and they would trust that we had the same values, even if it was a different proposition of what it was doing. So there were just so many benefits to doing it. And it did, like, you know, back to Brandon's example, like it made it great. Like if I was flying to Australia, I would meet different retailers for different brands, different buyers.
Maximising every opportunity.
Yeah. And actually, you know, bringing everything in-house, like we couldn't have afforded our own manufacturing, our own labs if we only had one brand. But because we had multiple brands, well, effectively each brand would pay 10% of that person's salary.
Yes.
So, you know, you think about how much a PR person is. You might be like, oh, we can't afford that. But actually each brand could afford 10% of it. So it just made it possible really to do more.
That's so interesting. I've never actually thought of it like that.
Yeah, and it really did work. So the only time it stopped working was when we launched The Ordinary. So The Ordinary was our 11th brand to launch. So it's a good job we didn't stop at 10 because we just had to keep going. But it's interesting with The Ordinary because we, you know, I always think The Ordinary was probably subconsciously the result of everything we had learned before then. So
That's so
we'd
interesting.
obviously started in 2013 and The Ordinary launched at the end of 2016.
Right.
So we'd had 3.5 years of different brand launches, you know, working with different retailers, like different journalists. We had a following, which was, you know, felt big at the time, although it was small.
And at this
compared
point,
to
was
The Ordinary.
anything not working? Any of those brands were you like, oh, this is...
It didn't feel like it at the time.
Right.
But then The Ordinary became so big that it almost then made like everything before just seemed tiny.
Right.
But oh no, at the time we were like, we are were winning at
Hitting
life.
the ground.
Like
Yeah.
You know, reviews were great, sales were great, like everything was good, but the Ordinary was just this kind of like phenomenon, which kind of blew everything else out the water. But you see, the Ordinary launched. We never. Well, I guess you can't really plan. And again, I think it's when people talk about like doing your consumer research, and Brandon always used to say this, like, until the product's on the shelf and like the consumer's prepared to spend their £20, it doesn't matter what they say in, you know, a consumer panel, because everyone's like, oh, I like this, I don't like the smell, but actually, like, until you launch, like, that's when you get the real data. So the Ordinary was born from a concept of, so we had NIOD, which for anyone who's like a skincare enthusiast, like NIOD for us was this next generation, super high tech. Like if you had your own lab and you went in and made skincare, NIOD would be it, because you'd like, what's new? Like I want all of it, like highest concentrations, just like.
Almost like professional level.
Yeah, like, but like it doesn't, I don't care what it smells like, what it looks like, what it feels like. I just want like the best of everything. Work. So for us, like we were like, NIOD is really like groundbreaking, next level. And I remember we saw like, you know, we picked up a magazine and we saw it next to a vitamin C product, which was like a 30-year-old technology, but a very established brand, you know, shouting about their new like vitamin C cream. And we were like, gosh, like this is so frustrating that the consumer doesn't see that isn't new, that's been around forever. And we felt like NIOD was just so good that like it was kind of frustrating to compare. But we said, actually, those ingredients, like they are very good ingredients. And actually, you know, the comparison we use, because people, I think as consumers, we get so used to thinking that actually price point must mean efficacy. That
you're so right.
The more I pay, the better it must be.
If I'm on the shelf, that one. Well, that's, you know, that's the most expensive, so I reckon that's the best.
It's what we're like programmed to believe. But I always think if you had a headache and you went into a pharmacy and saw paracetamol, which we know would cost like a pound to £2, or you saw a brand new headache painkiller for £100, which is, you know, only been around for the last couple of years, it's new studies, you'd probably be like, no, I'm going to stick with paracetamol. It's safe, it's effective, like I know it's going to work. Like we actually don't need anything else, because like the solution is there. So effectively the concept then for the Ordinary was like, let's do the same for skincare, because actually consumers don't understand. There's some knowledge of like, you know, retinols and hyaluronic acid, but really, and if you go back 10 years ago, like the level of skincare ingredient knowledge was so much less than it is today. Something like niacinamide, like consumers didn't know. So we were like, let's take all of those ingredients that have been around for a long time, but are so safe, they're so effective, like they really are proven to work, just like paracetamol, aspirin, ibuprofen. Like healthcare have done a really good job of transparency and consumers understanding the right ingredients, the right price points, but also what's a fair price to really pay for that. Like if you went into a shop and you saw paracetamol at £30, I'm not paying that. Like
I know this works.
So healthcare's really like one at that. So we're like, actually, that needs to be applied to skincare. So one, that people can understand NIOD, that actually this is all new technologies, but also just to give people a choice, because like, you know, the reality is today, like good skincare is accessible. Like most people should be able to afford quality skincare. And I think too often we still, you know, we all see like an advert and we get excited about a product, and often like they do under deliver. Whereas I think with the Ordinary, people were actually amazed by the results. But I also think the thing that made there are many factors I think that went into the Ordinary success. But because we'd had these brands before it, I think, you know, with Brandon, with DECIEM, like we had such a good relationship with the journalists. And again, like when we launched in 2016, you know, social media was around, but it wasn't the influencer type feel that it is today. Like journalists really were still kind of the trusted source of, you know, authority and knowledge within
and still
the
that kind of
world.
expert voice.
That's who you kind of went to, you know, Sunday Times style, like people were looking in there for their advice. And because they knew they'd met Brandon, and we had Prithvi, our chief scientific officer, and like Brandon and Prithvi are like geniuses. You know, when you meet someone and like, I mean, the level of like science and understanding. And, you know, I remember Brandon always saying to me, like, we have to, like, anyone that creates a skincare brand, like, if you're not understanding the science, what are you doing? Because there are so many big players out there. The only chance you have of being better than them is understanding the actives, the science, how it works better than them. Because otherwise, I mean, they have way more money. They're going to be way bigger than us.
Yes.
So, like, we had to have that, and we have to have the agility. So I think because the journalists knew we had the credibility on the science, they were like, wow, these products are like, you know, £4, £5, £6, but like they really do work. And then The Ordinary really just grew from like word of mouth, like it was such an organic journey.
Yeah.
And then because we never had stock, so we couldn't really do marketing if we wanted to for the first few years.
There wasn't enough stock for press boxes.
We were manufacturing ourselves, and you know, we never really knew what the demand was, because each time we would up production, it would sell out by the time it even kind of hit the shelves again. And it's interesting. Sorry, I feel like the story goes.
No. I'm honestly, I'm all ears.
But you see, with The Ordinary, the other thing that was interesting was when we pitched it to a couple of retailers, two of our biggest partners in the world now, for The Ordinary, but at the time they both said no to listing the brand.
That's so interesting.
Because they were like, it's too complicated, consumers won't understand it, you know, you need to rebrand this as like anti-aging serum, your boxes are too white, they're going to get dirty on the shelf, it won't stand out, you need more colouring. La, 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 la.
Which is so interesting, because I think when I think of The Ordinary, I think that you really simplify it. I feel like I know where I am, which is so interesting that would be confusing.
You see, well, I think a couple of things. So actually, one thing from the packaging, I mean, like, I find if I go into Sephora, the Ordinary is like sea of white. It's so calming because everything's like this multicoloured rainbow.
Exactly that.
That actually, I think like that is kind of simplified, and, you know, the aesthetic plays a big part, because, you know, like the one brand I've always just thought does incredibly well is like Aesop. Like, you know, like the way it looks is so important.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, The Ordinary is interesting because some people are like, oh, it's like very minimalist. But I'm like, that design like fits anyone's bathroom. Like whether you're male, female, like whatever the design is, like you're proud to have it out. So like the design was like a really big part of it. But then it's interesting because, you know, especially in the early days, I mean, if you went back to a version of our website in 2016, 2017, you needed a science degree to go
Really?
on. And, you know, at the beginning, like part of our... Brandon always used to have this amazing saying, which was to get 1 million people to like you, you first need 1,000 people to love you. So it was always like, let's just find our niche, because actually if you get a niche to love you, eventually the masses tend to follow.
And what was your approach with that? What was your kind of strategy for kind of getting eyes and ears on The Ordinary at that point? How were you getting that 1,000 to love you? Because as soon as they had the product, they loved you. Yeah. But how were you targeting the right customer?
So the science community just took hold of it. And, you know, this was kind of like on Reddit. And people were just creating these forums to talk about the products. And I remember there was an amazing lady, Joanne from Spain, who started this chat room, like The Ordinary chat room on Facebook. I mean, that group now has over 200,000 members in. Nothing to do with us. But I remember quite quickly, you know, the brand was only a few months old, and I think there was like 50,000 people in this Facebook group. And this is nothing to do with us.
It wasn't being controlled by you.
Entirely independent. And you would go on there, and like, I mean, there was posts like every 10 minutes, like 90 comments of people just almost like creating like recommendations and regimes for each other. Because what I think The Ordinary did that wasn't there before was actually allowed the conversation to happen. Because I think skincare pre The Ordinary, products were very much, they were named much more like adjectively, you know, miracle this, or, you know, everything was kind of fluffy, that it was almost difficult to talk about. Whereas when The Ordinary came in, it was like, well, I'm using niacinamide 10%, I'm using the 1% this, I'm using Azalea. Like, people suddenly were almost like coming up with their own prescriptions and like layering it and kind of building it.
And then that sort of sparks that, I suppose, that curiosity.
Yeah, and I think so, because the science community really got into it, because, you know, there was actually a lot of people out there that studied like cosmetic science and like loved learning. And again, we'd go into like, this is the pH of the product, like this is all of the formulation details, so you understand what goes into it and how it works. But then I think when you have the science community, like almost leading the conversation to say like, wow, these products really work. You know, we all trust people that...
Who's going to argue with scientists?
Exactly.
Not me.
So then like, you know, more and more people then followed, and that's kind of then really like how the word of mouth started.
Yeah. And everybody likes to think like, you know, even that kind of like sort of filtering down to like what would land in my girls' group chat. And they're like, well, so-and-so said it. Well, apparently a scientist said that if you use a bit of, it's kind of that conversation that we all want to feel like we're privy to.
Yeah. I mean, our number one selling product now is niacinamide. And it just seemed like if you go on like Google search trends, like 10 years ago, no one was searching niacinamide.
Right.
And now the fact that actually so many people know that is like, I mean, it is an incredible ingredient for your skin. Like, it's just amazing, that level of knowledge that has now passed to such a wider audience.
All through, you know, the brand, which is kind of interesting that a brand would put an ingredient on the map. And I mean, it's absolutely genius. I want to touch on Brandon, because obviously this is a podcast about you and celebrating everything that you've done. But he was such a big part of your journey and everything that I suppose that you did together and what you achieved together. What was your dynamic like? Because obviously you met in a completely different way. You didn't meet with the idea of working together in the capacity that you ended up working. What was your relationship like as two people that worked together?
Like, incredible. And again, like, I'm just so grateful for meeting him at the point in my life. And you know, when you just, you know, there's someone you've just learned so much from. Like, all of my best lessons come from Brandon. And actually what I think was really special again about DECIEM was, you know, so Brandon was a decade older than all of us. But obviously when DECIEM started, everyone he was hiring was just in their early 20s because we couldn't afford anyone other than like the odd finance person where we needed some skills. And then Brandon taught all of us. Like, he spent so much, like, he was a teacher through and through.
Wow.
So I feel like he taught, and what's nice about even DECIEM as of today, like, I look around and there are so many of the original team members who were kind of taught by Brandon, and they know all of his like lessons, like his way of thinking. Like, he was a maverick, he was so different, but like he was so talented on everything from like the science. And he would, you know, he'd drop me off one day, pick me up the next morning, and he'd have already read like another 80 studies on something. I'm like, I've only not seen you from like 9 p.m. last night, and he's like, this is where we are. It's like he was, you know, like obsessive in those ways. But like, you know, it always used to amaze me, like, how could someone be that good at like science, at design? Like, he had the answer, and like he was just so confident, and just, you know, he was high maintenance, which I think, you know, a lot of founders are. Yeah. And I think that's where like I'm quite calm. And I think, you know, the combination of us, I think, just really worked because, you know, startup can be stressful. And again, you know, back then, like, there wasn't very good work-life balance. But I always say, like, it was fine because actually none of us really had much of, no one had kids. Like, no one had commitments out. Like, everyone kind of signed up for, like, look, we are fully in here. And if we all have to stay to the office till midnight, like, we're there because we want to be, because we're creating something new and it's so exciting, and someone's just giving us, you know, an opportunity for an FSU, but only if we can get the artwork there in time. So, like, we're just jumping at those opportunities. Yeah. So he was just like the most incredible personality. But I think, you know, sometimes when someone's brain is such a genius, it's kind of, you know, you see it with other people now. And like, it's hard to ever diagnose other, you know, people that you don't know. But I almost think there's geniuses and then like mental health challenges. I think there's almost a very fine line between
sort of high functioning.
It's like their brain is so active.
Yes.
That kind of, I don't know, like they just think differently to all of us, and like the world is such a better place for those people. And then at times, you know, sometimes it doesn't go wrong, but like a different part happens, and you know, you have to deal with that. And I think what was really hard for us was, so The Ordinary launched at the end of 2016, and I mean, instantly we just we couldn't catch our breath because it just exploded. Then we got investment from Estee Lauder companies in the summer of 2017. So, that, you know, The Ordinary was only 9 months old at this point. And then at the beginning of 2018 was kind of when, everything changed with Brandon and he had his challenges. So we'd only had a year of The Ordinary. We're 6 months into an investment with Estee Lauder when it was kind of like the whole world changed, and it was so unexpected. And again, like, I'm probably naive, and because I am always cup half full, like I kind of don't always maybe see the risks and things that come. But then 2018 happened, which was like the most horrendous year. And, we're dealing with someone who we really like is a best friend, like, like you're a startup yourself, like your culture's different, like you're not just colleagues, like you're really living and breathing
You're in
together.
You're in the trenches, you're in the highs, you're in the lows, but it's an extension of your family, isn't it?
This was family. So 2018 was just like the most horrible year, but we had this point of like, The Ordinary was going like this. The business was crumbling from like a people
behind the scenes. Yeah.
We obviously had this new investor, and again, like, any startup dreams of getting an investment from someone like Estee Lauder companies. And then a few months later, you're like, oh my gosh, like the whole kind of
this
shit's
is falling
hitting
apart. And then,
the
of
fan.
course, having that investor brings extra pressure and extra kind of, you want to seem like everything is all together in front of those people that are kind of betting on you at that time.
And I have to say, like, I mean, I'm actually so grateful that it was Estee Lauder companies, because they, they're a family company, and like the one thing that they always came to us were like, we're about like family values, we're about humans, and like they really cared so much about the situation, about Brandon, about myself, about all of the team. And I think had we been with another PE firm, I feel like there'd have been other people that would have handled situations very differently,
and they were supportive.
And we were so lucky just to have like support, love, patience. Whilst when you're in a situation where like there is no right answer, like
how do you handle it? How do you and it's nobody knows the right answer, as you say. When at this point you'd known each other for a long time and you have that family closeness. When did you feel like things were sort of changing for the worst?
So at the end of 2017, there were like a few signals, a few conversations, a few comments where I was like, oh, like this just feels a little bit different. But then really it was overnight or during the holiday break for Christmas and New Year where like everything changed. And I was in Australia at the time, and like when I came back to Toronto in early January, it was just like instant, like a light switch where someone who you've just known as like, he was, even though he was high maintenance, like he was so kind, he was so generous, he was so full of love. And then someone's just suddenly like a stranger. And then so I left the business in the February, so everything was quite quickly. And then at that point I was like, okay, like I can't do anything to help, because this is it just felt such an unmanageable situation. And
did you feel that you were sort of, as much as you are close and you want to help, but the person you know and love is changing in front of you, did you then feel really on the outside of that?
Completely on the outside. And it was difficult because, I also felt like everyone was looking at me to be like what can we do? Like, and like, but I was also scared of him. Like, suddenly when you've gone from, like, I was never like, I would have said anything to him, like you just have that fully open relationship.
But you now don't know how to act. You don't know how to kind of handle a situation or be yourself in a situation.
Yeah, and I think, since I've spoken about this on different things over the past couple of years, honestly, the amount of people that have reached out to me and had something similar, like in their family or, and what I find so hard is like, if this situation happened again, I wouldn't know how to handle it any differently, because it feels like as a society, we kind of don't have any more answers yet. Like mental health, addiction, like it's still such a, if someone has cancer, like there is kind of a consensus around like, okay, this is the treatment plan. Like this is how we can get, like you make a plan and you're all aligned.
To take. Yeah.
Whereas when it's mental health, it's so difficult because like, you're trying to get a diagnosis against the thing that's telling you that there's not. It's just so complex.
There's such a push and pull with it, isn't there? And it's kind of, it's not, I mean, nothing's linear, but particularly with mental health, it's so, it's so up and down. And when you're kind of watching someone that you love and adore in that way, but you feel very helpless, and it goes back to being that kind of control freak in you want to fix it, and you want to step in, and you want to be that person that can, you know, put a band-aid over it and be able to help, but it's impossible.
Yeah, and like, you know, you have the, because it's like an area I try and look into, but then you have all like the human rights issues, because it's difficult. Like, I see you with my dad with the addiction, like, you know, someone just needs to stop, but you can't force him to stop. And like, you know, with Brandon, like he would get sectioned and then he'd be released again, and we'd just be like back into this circle. So 2018 was just incredibly difficult. So then when it got to the October, he got removed from the company by a court order. And this was, you know, I guess kind of the last straw was when he'd done an Instagram post saying, like, we're shutting the whole company down.
And do you have a relationship at this point?
We do, but it's a very difficult one.
Fractious.
Well, it's kind of a, you know, one day he'd be like, I love you so much, you're the best thing ever. Then the next day he'd be, we'd be in an Uber and he'd be like, someone's filming us, like, I need to get out here, like, make sure we're not followed. You know, like, the paranoia and just, like, things that wouldn't make sense. And sometimes then you would have a brilliant business conversation and then there'd be, like, a threatening email that would go out to, like, with the whole world on CC from, like, your buyers, journalists, like, you know, the entire team. So it was such a, like, hard place to balance. And I think because when I tried to, like, say, are you okay, and kind of get him help earlier, he'd pushed me away. So then when I kind of came back into the fold, I was like, okay, how am I going to manage it this time? Because I'd rather feel like I was there to protect where I can. But I know he doesn't want you to be, you know, it's difficult. Like, he doesn't think he's ill, so you can't say, are you okay? Like, you can't behave in this way.
It's so sensitive.
It's just like an impossible situation to manage. So everyone, like, again, like, everyone had just been so supportive because there was just so much love. But obviously when it got to the point of, like, the whole company shutting down, it was, I mean, there's everyone's livelihoods now, everyone's jobs. And I think it was also clear, like, he wasn't getting better, like, he was only getting worse. So the court order was temporary. So, like, let's kind of just remove him and then see, like, hopefully, and, you know, people say, like, someone has to reach rock bottom to get better. So, like, okay, maybe if he feels like he's losing DECIEM, that will be his, like, kickstart to actually, like, get the help he needs, turn it around. But everyone was always, like, committed to, like, look, it's just temporary. Like, he'll come back in as CEO, back in as founder, or, like, whatever he wants. Like, we just want him to be healthy and happy. So that was in the October. And at that point, I was 7 months pregnant with my first daughter, Mila. So then I became sole CEO. So again, it's still this balancing act between, okay, we have this, like, incredible growth. We have a company that's crumbled because there's been firings. People have left, like, you know, we've lost so many people.
And it's really quite public too.
It's so public.
Because there's that added pressure of this being quite noisy, and we're talking, like, company-wide big emails and, you know, firing and to Twitter.
Instagram, like, you know, he was doing videos. It was all over social. So there was kind of all of that to sort. But then there was also, like, oh my gosh, like, there's this person we love who's suffering. And, like, we've kind of given up hope a little bit because, you know, when someone's been to hospital in many countries and then they're let out, like, you've got different approaches from, you know, different friends, like the lawyer, like, everyone's tried and we're not getting anywhere. So then, you know, the end of that year was kind of just trying to keep an eye on Brandon, like, try and kind of fix the company, get things working. And then obviously in January, we actually heard via the press, we got an inquiry to say, can you confirm Brandon's passed away?
Gosh.
And I remember, like, at the time I was like, no, I'm sure he hasn't. And I remember, so I was in the UK and I rang Stephen, our COO, to say, like, we've just had this, like, I haven't heard anything. And he went to the police station and that's how we found out it was true. And at that point, like, his family didn't know, his friends didn't know, like, no one knew, but we also knew, the press now knew. So, like, there wasn't long to communicate with everyone that we had to. So that was early January, and it's just, you know, sometimes it still doesn't even feel real he's not here.
No.
And it's such, like, he had so much to give in life, and it's just so sad when it ends in that way. And I feel like he never even got to truly see the success that like even The Ordinary became, or like when I look at our team now, and we are so like diverse, and like, you know, for me, like belonging was always a big thing of what Brandon wanted our culture to be, and we've achieved so much because of him.
But he's not here
And
to
he's
kind
just-
of taste that.
Yeah.
I mean, goodness me, I can't, this is a situation that it's almost the unthinkable. And in this, you're losing a friend, you're grieving, but shortly just before you have a baby. So I don't know, is there, between Brandon's passing and then you giving birth, there's like, 21 days or something?
Yeah.
Something crazy. There's so much going on and so much to comprehend, but how, as a woman, we all know that post-baby time it's so hard to find your feet, and it's such a tricky time. There's that kind of that maternity leave energy that every woman has to face, where you think, oh gosh, this is everything to me. I don't want to walk out on that, but also this is a really big milestone for me, and this is a pivotal moment in my life, and I'm about to become a mum, and for you that was for the first time. You've now lost someone that you love and you adore. You then give birth, and this is also a gorgeous time in your life, but it's having that kind of loss and that bringing life into the world so close together. Where are you in that time? How are you mentally? Because it's a lot to kind of deal with, and but then also knowing that everyone's looking to you in terms of DECIEM, in terms of The Ordinary. You are the girl that's going to put that cape on and save the day. I mean, saying it's pressure would be small frying that at that time. How is Nicola? How are you coping?
You know what? I think I was so busy. And it was probably the best thing, because I feel like even now I'm like, gosh, I don't know if I've ever had a minute to grieve Brandon. And I always think it's like, and even like probably back to my dad and stuff, like I'm someone that you keep busy, you keep going.
Busy brain's a happy brain
sometimes
for
just
you.
like never stopping. And I think, you know, it wasn't really a choice back then, because it's like, okay, this company needs saving. And we have all of these people who are, you know, like emotionally really suffering, as in like within the team, like they've been through a lot, but also like we have this business that's like
it has
growing
to happen
exponentially, and like we kind of also owe it to Brandon. Like this is also like his only legacy now, and kind of what we can build from here. And then you have a baby who, like, you know, all I dreamed of was like, it's funny because like I always said growing up, it was either like entrepreneur or stay-at-home mum, and like even now I go through both. Like some days, you know, I'll like be at soft play or a playroom, I'm like, oh, I love being a stay-at-home mum, and then I like come and do a business thing and I'm like, I love being business. And you know, it's finding like the balance of the two. And like the one thing that I do think within, you know, Mila's first year, and this is where again I think, you know, like being an entrepreneur and kind of having your own flexibility of the way you look at flexibility. Like Mila was always with me, but obviously in the first year there's just a lot of cuddles, there's lots of naps. Like she'd be on the sling, I'd be on my laptop kind of working, and you know, my mum would come on trips with me, my husband would come on trips with me, so there was kind of like just a community,
yes,
that we just kind of got through it.
Bit of a bubble.
Yeah, and actually, you know, it's like I said, like I feel like then I had more time when the kids have got older, where, you know, they appreciate the farm days more. Like, you know, they can't, you're on your phone, they're like, mummy, like, get off, watch me do this.
And you're like, God, it would be easy if you were in a sling right now.
Yeah. So actually, I find in some ways, you know, I know you have the tiredness, but I actually found the first year quite easy to like blend, just because, you know, like Mila would just come, and, you know, her first year, I think she did 15 trips to Toronto. She went to like Shanghai. She started crawling in Australia at 9 months.
She's well travelled.
But actually, she was like the perfect age to travel with. So actually, I felt like, you know, it was a blend. But yeah, I think just like busyness kind of just got through that first year. So then that was, you know, 2019. And then 2020, we were getting ready to do a deal with ELC in terms of selling the company. And, you know, this had been like a long negotiation, like it's a big process in those types of things. And we were just about to sign the deal. I remember it was my birthday on March 26th, and they rang it, and they were just, COVID had just hit. And they were just like, look, we can't sign, a huge check when the whole world's about to shut down, and like none of us know what's going to happen. And because my husband's got his own business as well, and he had like some similar things happening in terms of like all of these customers just being like, whoa, like...
Well, the kind of wheels just fell off the world,
Yeah,
didn't
no
they?
one knew what was going to happen. So I remember we were just there like, what is going to happen? And then it's interesting because probably within a month later, both my husband's business and I, like COVID was a boom because suddenly actually like everyone was at home. Everyone was shopping skincare, not colour. We were already quite well positioned online because, again, when you're a younger brand, like online just really works. Whereas a lot of the legacy brands were much more focused on bricks and mortar distribution. They were more in department stores. So suddenly it was like, okay, we're everywhere where consumers are shopping, and actually competition's a lot less. Everyone's now obsessing over skincare. And I feel like as well, it was kind of the time when TikTok really became a thing.
Yes.
And like, so it was kind of felt like...
We're all doing those dances over lockdown.
Yeah, everyone was locked down, just skincare, TikTok, doing their things. So actually that next year for us was like, I mean, I say we'd already gone like this, but then we went like this. Because again, so you're like now dealing like, we've just kind of got things back on track. And now we've got this, again, new set of just phenomenal circumstances that have actually all lucked out in The Ordinary's favour from a demand perspective. I mean, gosh, our fill rates are like, we were lucky to even get anything above about 30%. And the problem is because the retailers knew we couldn't deliver. So then, if they needed 100 units, they would order 1,000 units.
Because they want to be sat
because
on
they'd think
the
maybe
stock.
we'll like just give them like 10%.
Yeah.
So we didn't even know what anyone actually wanted because it was like everyone had this
Plucking
game of like
numbers out.
bluffing and like, well, maybe if we say this, you might give us this, because it was just crazy at that time. So COVID ended up being like a huge boom for the business. So then obviously when we re-entered the conversations in 2021, which was when Estée Lauder Companies then became our majority owner. But again, I think what was been really nice about our relationship with them, it was 7 years from the first investment to them fully acquiring the business, which meant that actually it's like we took time. They really, and obviously, the first few years when they're the minority, they don't particularly have any say in anything. They're just like listening, they're just observing, we're maybe asking them some questions about markets or things that we don't know yet. And then obviously so we had that for 4 years. And then when we transitioned into them being the majority, it kind of, slightly shifted where, they then have a little bit more responsibility. But because they had so much trust in the team and what we were capable of, like they were like, we know you guys, like you've kind of got this.
You've
you
already
keep doing
kind
what
of
you're
forged
doing.
that sort of marriage, as it were, and you've already you've both proved yourself to each other, I suppose.
And like through the journey, so we always reported into Stéphane de la Favre, who's now become the CEO, and he's just phenomenal and incredible and like really like believed in us. So I feel like so lucky that we had them as the partner, and like they were really part of the journey. And they've always been like, they've really understood that we're different to other brands, we're different to their brands, and actually we need to behave in a different way, we need to be treated in a different way, and I think that respect goes a long way.
And they embrace that.
Incredibly.
I have sort of read interviews, and there's a kind of statement that you use about yourself where you dub yourself the most unqualified CEO. Yeah. Explain to me what that means, because your success tells a very different story, girl. What does that mean to you?
So I think I mean from like, if I applied for a CEO role at any other company like the size of DECIEM, there's no way I would get it, because, my understanding of financials and supply, like all of those areas, like, I don't mean to say they're the boring side of the business, but, kind of like the operational side, like, I haven't got the energy for it. Like, I get excited about, like, new brands, the products, new markets, and kind of all of that side. And I feel, I don't know, sometimes I'm like, gosh, how have I got this far? You just keep waiting.
Do you think that's a bit of, like, imposter syndrome?
Well, I actually don't know, because I feel lucky. I mean, look, there was no one better than me, because there's no one who could have loved the brand and the people more than I did.
Right.
So that's what makes it so unique and special, I think, to DECIEM. But gosh, I'd be like a terrible CEO at another company. And again, I'm like, but I guess it's the difference between, like being a co-founder and like, because look, energy goes so far. And like, I always think energy is something that you can't teach people. Like, you have it or you don't. And again, like, I think I've always been good at bringing in people and recognizing who are the good people.
Yes.
And, you know, like, we would be, you know, like Dion, our chief brand officer, like, there are just some people who are so fundamental to the success of DECIEM. And even in the more boring areas, you know, like, we've like probably went through 8 different finance directors, but we hit the jackpot eventually, and then that really stuck. So, you know, like, I think I've been good at finding the right people, but it's always one of those strange ones where, and especially, you know, when you're younger and like actually most of the people around you, like with experience, are obviously kind of older, they have more experience, and it's a strange feeling when, you know, like everyone. So I feel like normally when you progress in a career, you know, you're always kind of better skilled than the person below you, because you know, you get the promotion and like you've done that job and then you do that. Whereas I feel like, you know, the scale of DECIEM and everything, like, the only thing that I had more of, I think, was just the love and the energy and the passion. But I mean, the finance director, the supply, you know, all of those people are 10 times more skilled than I am at that particular field. But I think, you know, values are everything. And I think, you know, there's those types of things that, like, I live and breathe, it's in my DNA, and actually just like consistently show, and like the love and the trust, and I think, you know, people get you such a long way. So I feel like that stuff I was always strong at.
Well, you can't underestimate that. That's like the fibre and, like you say, the DNA of the brand, you know, and that is, of course, every qualification counts. Of course, we know that, but the energy for the brand, like you say, it speaks for itself. It really, really does.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just being a positive, high energy person, I think actually goes a really long way.
Yeah.
But also someone who's quite calm. So actually, like, you know, I feel like any scenario, you know, it's kind of like, look, we can find a solution. Like, we've got this. Like, we just need to kind of find the right thing. And, you know, I think for any company, like in your early days, like, agility is everything.
It's so, so important.
And we actually had something recently which I just loved, because I felt, you know, we've obviously got much bigger now, and you can't help but getting slower. It's just the nature of the game, because, you know, where we used to launch a product, now when we launch a product, like, we have to have it in pretty much most markets at the same time. Right. Because if we don't, then we're going to piss off. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You piss them off, girl.
We're going to annoy consumers. You know, like in Australia, they're going to be like, why don't we have that? Like, TikTok, social, like, everything's global now. So, like, you have to plan it. Retailers, they need to know in advance, like, where you're going. You've got regulations. You have to register. Like, it just gets more complex.
Of course.
But recently we did something in the US, so I don't know if it's not been so much in the news in the UK, but they've had like a huge egg shortage. There's been like a huge outbreak of bird flu. And like, eggs have become like, you're queuing and they're all sold out by 9 a.m.
Like the toilet roll.
Exactly
like the kind
like
of toilet
that.
roll shortage.
And it's like
lockdown.
$20 for like 12 dozen eggs. It's just like become this like absurd thing. So anyway, within 12 days, the team did this partnership with Mischief, where we basically managed to find a supplier of eggs, and we sold like the ordinary eggs in our New York stores.
So good.
And anyway, so like 12 days from like the idea to having it in store. And like, this was just basically done on WhatsApp.
That was how you executed.
And like, that never
12
happens
days.
anymore. And anyway, it was just such an amazing moment I found for like the company, and it became our most ever liked post on Instagram. So, you know, when like and I always say to the team now is you have to get this balance between, so any startup, like, agility is your biggest superpower. As you get bigger, like, you have to be more planned. There's more people. There's just kind of more things that you need to deal with. But I'm always like, you need to, you know, if you're 80% planned, you have to keep 20% for, because, you know, 3 months ago, we wouldn't know that there was going to be this egg moment that we could like jump on.
Yes.
But actually, someone saw it, we jumped on it, and actually it was an amazing moment for the brand.
Yeah, and that beauty of being able to be reactive and execute that in such a big way is kind of like, that's exciting, right?
Like, it was such a thrill. And again, you know, because it just felt so startup-y again to do it, which was really nice.
Those moments.
Yeah.
So let's talk about you now, because so much, you know, those kind of the dark times and those dips you have soared, and like, not just The Ordinary and DECIEM as a business, but you as a person too. What does your role look like now? Because I know that you've last year, at the end of last year, you stepped away. So what made that decision, and how does that look like now?
So, DECIEM it's been, I guess, 13 years of my life. And I love it. I love the people. And, when you're thinking like the next chapter, and I guess what was my children are 6 and 4, and they're growing so quickly. And, I want to be there for all the moments. Like, my 4-year-old, sorry, he doesn't start school till September. He's one of the oldest in his year. But like I want to enjoy those like last few days with him before he actually starts school and kind of just be there for everything. And I thought, gosh, like, we've built so much, we've achieved so much. Like I finally have the freedom that I wanted, that I don't want to feel like I'm missing out on stuff because I have to be on a Zoom call and I have to be here. And again, maybe the stuff that I actually am not the best at anymore, because it has become so much bigger that you do need someone who is more organized and got supply, like has everything under control, which definitely was not my qualifications. So, I had lots of conversations with Stefan, with Jesper, who we brought in as our general manager a couple of years ago. And I was like, look, I will talk forever about how incredible DECIEM and The Ordinary are. Like, I truly believe like we are some of the best brands and the best people on the planet. But I was like, I don't want to be in meetings about supply chain and stock and inventory and like all of that other stuff. Like, I want to enjoy this time now whilst my family are young. Like, I just want more freedom. Like, all the things that, when you have young children, like, I don't have time to read books or
The
like
things that you don't want to miss.
There's just other stuff that I want to do. So then I'm like, well, what do you want? So we just came up with such a happy thing now. So like I stay on as co-founder. So effectively I still get to be involved in like the brand, the vision, the strategy, like new products. But then also just like sharing our message, going to China in a few weeks where we're launching there. So I feel like it's just a happy blend now. And it also gives me time, I still don't know at this stage. Like I think I was saying to you earlier, like I go through a stage of another business, another brand, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want more children and like have family.
Well, it's kind of like it goes back to what you said at the start of the conversation, which that you strive for freedom, for the financial freedom, but also for how that looks to you. And that's kind of caught between the idea of would I, is my goal in life to be a stay-at-home mum or an entrepreneur? It goes back to those decisions you were making as a little one, which is so interesting.
And the thing I think about life is, when people talk about like having it all, it's so hard to have it all at one point. Yes. But I feel like within your life you can have it all. But it's just understanding. I mean, like in my 20s, like gosh, like the hours I worked was like insane. Like the evenings, the weekends, like it was so intense. But now I'm in my 30s and I am in this period with like a young family. I'm like, gosh, like I want the freedom. Yeah. But that doesn't mean there's not another chapter where you can like get more involved or, at the moment I've made a couple of investments and like that side I'm loving because it's kind of like you still get some of the energy and the entrepreneurship, but like you're not the one having to do the hard work.
Yeah, and it's so nice because I was going to come on to that actually, and I've noticed that and I've seen a lot of that on your social too. Does that feel important to you to kind of having built... And, DECIEM is now a $3.6 billion company, which is an absolute beast. Is it important to you to kind of help other people along the way too? And do you get as much of a thrill out of that?
I think it's like the passion. Like if I meet someone else high energy, like I just love them. And yes. I love meeting like other people with ideas, entrepreneurs, founders, and sharing like, and it's difficult, like I share our advice of what we did. But the one thing is like the world changes so quickly. And like what worked for us a few years ago is different for a brand now, like it feels at the moment, I think. So what I think was really good for indie brands was like almost the barriers came down and it suddenly became so easy for like new brands to launch. But the downside of that, I feel like it also feels quite crowded now. Yeah. And quite saturated with so many new brands. So like, everything's just different in a period. But like if I can help people or invest in stuff, like it's just exciting and it's fun. And yeah, I think there's lots of interesting areas still for people to go after.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you're going after all of them. And I love that because that excitement, when you're that high energy person, that excitement never dies. It just doesn't, does it? And you can recognise that in someone else. And if you can invest in them and what they do, why not, right? There needs to be more of that. I want to do our rocket round now, which we ask our guests the same questions every episode. It's supposed to be quick fire, but we're a little bit lenient because we like to chat. So the first one is, what do you think the non-negotiables are for launching a business?
Passion, energy, you have to have. But I don't think it has to be passion around the industry as such, because I think, I actually I feel like all my coaching comes from, you open Instagram and you feel like you're getting coached by so many different people. But it's interesting because it was saying, people want the glamorous industries, and like, I'm lucky that it actually happened in beauty, which is so exciting. But they were saying that actually you shouldn't always follow your passion. I thought it was really good advice, as in, because, my husband, his business is flying. They have 150 people, like a 9-figure valuation. It's in e-learning, which, it's not the most glamorous of things, but like he got into that and like set up his own business and kind of followed that there. So it's almost like if you're passionate about being an entrepreneur, I think, depending on maybe your early years where you get experience, or like if you know people and you can learn about an industry, like I think it's okay for your passion to be being an entrepreneur rather than my passion is skincare. Because if your passion is skincare or fashion, like they're very competitive to get into. And so I think that's interesting, but you have to have passion and energy. Like if you want to be an entrepreneur, like it isn't easy. Like you have to hustle, like you have to just have that mentality of not giving up and really going. And then look, I think transparency is so important. You have to have a purpose. Like you have to really know like your why, but then you also have to be agile, because your why may change. And I think, your values need to be consistent, but like the world is fast pacing and consumers change their minds very often.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to have the agility, but really stick to your core values.
Yeah. When did you first realise that you truly launched? Was there a moment that you thought, wow?
I remember, so our first store, our own store we launched was in Spitalfields Market.
Oh, I love
and
Spitalfields.
it's so nice. And I remember the first time seeing someone with a carrier bag who, like, you haven't given them the bag, like they've actually obviously been in and bought. And that was I remember I was like, I was like, look, they brought a bag. And that was kind of a
real pinch me moment.
Yeah.
It's always those little things, isn't it? That you think it might be the point where we had investment or we sold this part of the company, but actually like those moments, they really do it, don't they?
Yeah, and I also remember like, you'd have people like, what do you do? Where do you work? And I'd be like, this is pre The Ordinary. I'd be like, DECIEM, we're like an umbrella of different, I'd be explaining because people wouldn't just know who we were from saying it. And I remember when I could then start saying, oh, like The Ordinary. And they'd be like, oh yeah, I know that brand.
Or I use
And it
that.
was such a shift between like, I'm like, we do Neil, we do Fountain, like we do all these other brands, like explaining them. So that was nice.
Yes. Yeah, there's no elaboration needed.
Yeah.
What is the first thing you do when you wake up and the last thing you do before you go to bed?
So the first thing is normally woken up by one of my children.
Mommy!
I have one who runs in and one who shouts and needs to like go and be brought in.
Do you know what? I have that dynamic. I'm not sure which is worse. I'm like,
Well, I actually like it because I always said to my husband, like, so normally like our daughter ends up in bed with us at some point in the night, whereas my son would shout and I would go into his bed. But I'm like, the day he realises Milo actually gets into bed with us, he's going to be
yes,
like, I
you're
want
right.
to be there.
Then that's two.
And then it's going to be too busy, so like it kind of works. But yeah, definitely in the mornings. Like I love being woken up by them. And I'm also someone like me and my husband, we like a good 8 to 9 hours sleep, When you see people like I live on 5, we're like, no, like
yeah, that's not for us.
So we don't wake up early, like the kids wake us up, and luckily that's normally about 7. And then last thing at night, I guess probably badly check my phone.
Yeah.
Watch Netflix.
We're all
do
there.
The usual things.
We're all there. The things that you're like, I wish that it wasn't my phone, but the phone is there. What's a skill you'd love to learn?
I feel like wellness is such an interesting area. And I feel like I just love all the businesses in terms of like preventative that are coming out, like my Aura Ring, like Necco, Prenuvo. Like I'm like, gosh, there are so many people killing it in that space. And I feel like it's something I want to get better at, like understanding all of like my biometrics and kind of how my body works.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. What's one thing you wish someone had told you before starting your businesses?
That's a hard one because, it's difficult because like I say this from a place of success, but I feel like, you want someone just to tell you like it's all going to be good.
Yes.
But then I kind of feel like I believed it was all going to be fine anyway. And I think, for all the heartbreak you go through, like there are so many moments of love, and you know, like you build relationships that are going to last your entire lifetime. But actually people are everything. Like it's your number one most important thing to focus on.
Yeah, and you're right. And I'm not sure that when it's often someone that sets out on a mission, they don't realise that actually how important that everybody is on that mission with you.
Yeah.
Because it all starts quite self-indulgently, right?
Yeah, but like if you find a good person, like nurture them, because like they are the ones that are going to get you. I mean, if you think about business, everything is about people, because it's your relationship with the buyer, your relationship with your consumer. Like everything is about humans. And I find it, you know, interesting with the, you know, AI and like ChatGPT, everything that's coming up. Like so many roles and tasks will be able to be done by AI, but AI will never be able to have that human connection.
Yes.
And I, you know, and I think about my kids and like what I try and teach them, I'm like, gosh, like empathy, emotional intelligence. Like I think it's the thing that's most of the successful entrepreneurs I know actually probably have a much higher EQ than IQ, because actually it's all about people, and actually your ability to adapt your style to other people, bring the best out of people.
Yes, you're so
It's
right.
all people.
So right. If you could choose one female figure as a mentor, past or present, who would that be?
That's a hard one. I probably may pick two people for different reasons. So one would probably be Anita Roddick, just from the sense of like someone who was so ahead of her time in terms of actually really like putting people, the planet, like all the things that we know are the right things to do. Like she really put them at the forefront. And what I think is a shame about like this moment in time is I feel like a few years ago it felt like we were all making so much progress.
Yes.
And now like the last year or so happens and I'm like, oh my gosh, like let's not undo all the goodness that we're trying in the world. But you know, and I think she started that like 50, 60 years ago. Like I think that was just like huge for her.
Ahead of her time.
And then the other person who I always think is like an interesting example from like female leadership, and I know people will find like controversy with the royal family, but I always felt like the Queen was someone who, and I know she was born into that role, but I mean, when she became Queen in like 1952, like women weren't respected in that way.
Yes.
And the way she held that power across like all the prime ministers and like, I mean, I just feel like actually as someone from like a female who really just like shone in leadership. And I think the other thing, you know, I don't think a leader always has to be the loudest. And I think, again, the Queen was kind of like, she had grace, she had, but she was always felt like she was consistent with her values. And, you know, I feel like, I certainly felt like there was stability. Like, I don't know if she had any power over the Prime Minister.
It felt like
but
that.
When she was there for so long, it just felt like, wow, this is someone who cares about, like, the country.
Yes.
And I just think from, like, a leadership spectrum, I'm like, it would be interesting to know how she was. But it always felt like she just had something special about her. And I think sometimes actually, like, being the quiet leader, but someone who's just consistently like believes in their values.
There's a lot to be said about that. Not being so loud and not being so. Yeah, there is
Bullshit.
definitely something in that, and I often think, well, there's definitely been a big difference since she's not been here.
Yeah,
you know, you kind
and
of.
I mean, the royal family now is like entirely different, but I just think when she became queen, like it really
at
meant
that moment
something.
in time.
At that moment in time, and like that was in a world where like men ruled the world like significantly back then. And I feel like, gosh, she really must have like held her own like in so many rooms.
And like you say, I know that you are born into that family, as it were, but to take it on in that way is something different in itself, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah, love that. I ask every guest to leave a tip. So I suppose one piece of like tangible advice that you'd give a listener to a lady that's looking to launch in perhaps a similar vein to you have, what would that be if you had one piece of advice?
You just have to get started because, you know, I see people where they, you know, they'll build like a 5-year, 10-year plan. You don't need that because you don't know what's going to happen. Like, plan 5 months out. Like, just get started. Like, you know, it's going to take some hustling and, you know, maybe it's a side thing whilst you're kind of still doing your role. But sometimes you just have to get the clock started.
Yeah.
Because you can figure things out once you're doing it. I mean, like, I think about so many of our brands, like, the brand names change, the packaging change. Like, you can adjust things as you go along because you'll get feedback. You'll see different things, like COVID happens. Like, there's just... the world's forever changing that you can't plan for. But the only thing you have to do is just get started at some point.
You're so right, because I think everybody lets that kind of fear of failing get in the way, or fear. We talk about this fear of failing loudly now with social media, but actually failing fast is the best thing that can happen if you just get on with it.
But also, I think so often, like, you know, we talk about failing, but it's just adaptability. Like, if you're someone who has, like, the energy and the drive, I mean, your business might change 10 times. Like, The Ordinary, it took us 11 times to, like, get the brand right. But we kept going. We kept trying new things. But you just have to get started. I think, you know, sometimes the longer you plan, well, the thing you've planned for, things have changed. Just get going and adjust as you go along.
And that's kind of a really interesting outlook, that actually have a 5-month plan rather than a 5-year at the start, because then that urges you to kind of, it gives you something to head for that's quite immediate rather than so far down the line, because that gives you an opportunity to sort of kick it down the road a little bit and let's wait for this to be perfect, or let's wait for that to happen where...
But I mean, even now for like DECIEM, like plans, like no one ever hits a plan perfectly. Like sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. Like, you know, everything, no one can predict the future. So actually all you can do your best is just start today and then adjust as you go.
I love that. And then lastly, a question I ask everyone because I'm nosy, and we've spoken all about being a lady who launches, but in terms of a lady who likes to lunch, if you're at work and you're in the office, how does lunch hour look to you? Where are you? Are you kind of working whilst you're lunching? Who are you with and what are you eating?
Oh gosh, so this would very much depend. So like when we're in Toronto, normally it's like a salad to the office. And so when I'm in Toronto, I feel like those days are so busy.
Yes.
That like every hour is like a meeting and stuff. So it's always a working lunch with like whoever's in the team, whoever's in the meeting. And if it's in London office, then normally I will be going out with one of like the team, Lizzie, Dion or someone. Always love a matcha latte, love a salad. I'm actually quite into fasting as well, depending on some days where like... I could quite easily skip breakfast and I could often skip lunch and get to dinner. So like depending on like, especially on Monday or Tuesday, would maybe try and do that. But yeah.
But what are you eating? So if you were going to be in London, you were going to go out, what's your kind of, if your team are going to order for you because they know you don't have time and they're like, okay, she'll be here in a minute, what are they ordering for you?
Oh gosh, probably like a salad. But I don't know. I feel like I change a lot. But
we
I'm
call
also
them
like,
sexy salads on the podcast.
Yeah.
We spoke about this and we like a sexy salad. Like a salad makes us sound like, because that's my go-to. I'm like a good salad, but like I want a lot of ingredients in that. I want the dressing. I want
cheese, the croutons,
everything. What's your dream?
Well, if I was building my own, I'd have like a romaine lettuce, but then I would add like the sweet potatoes, the mushrooms, the feta. Like some chicken, some salmon, like all the flavoured stuff.
And that's what makes it a sexy salad, you see. It doesn't need to be dry. Dry, when I think of like you order, it's a risky order. Because sometimes you'll go and you'll be like, I'll have a chicken salad and it's literally just that, chicken and leaves. No, you
need the juice and
stuff.
But honestly, I'm like, if it's pizza day, like I eat everything.
We'll take pizza
I'm happy.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rochelle.
I've absolutely loved that. It's been so nice talking to you and I feel like I've got to know you so well, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Don't forget to follow us on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts to make sure that you don't miss out, because next time I'm going to be joined by another incredible lady who launched. If like me, you're a watcher, then follow us on YouTube and please don't forget to like and subscribe.